and he is playwright, everything, performer, and he did agree to film the show because we had a little troubles. We had many troubles. Like just right now, I love this place. I love the Imperial Public Library. But they gave me a Grey Goose by mistake. You know how much it costs for Grey Goose? I ordered a double, and a very, very nice person. I'm not blaming her. Very nice. She just made boo-boos. But what happens? I order it, and then she goes $33 for a double Grey Goose.
It's worth it, though.
And I better get me drunk, or that's all I can say. Don't give a shit. It doesn't taste like anything. It's fucking vodka. Okay, now listen. Now you're going to hate me, because I know you love me up until now. No. Now you're going to hate me because I'm going to express an opinion. I don't know if you'll understand. Now you can throw things. You can also come up and argue with me. But I'm going to make a statement because I'm so upset. So they've made a movie about Jackie Shane. Does anybody know who Jackie Shane is? Jackie Shane was a marvelous performer. Back in before I was even born, well no, about when I was born was actually when she started with her singing, and she was a wonderful drag queen, a wonderful singer, a wonderful performer, and she played in Toronto, she played in the States. Now they've made a movie and they've started to lie about her. Now my understanding is that Jackie Shane identifies now as a trans person, but what they're doing is they're saying Jackie Shane, trans pioneer. When Jackie Shane was singing and performing so marvelously, she was a drag queen. As far as I know, she identified as a drag queen, but that's not what I'm talking about here. And as I say, I congratulate her that she is a trans person now, and that's how she identified. But back in that day, it was not the trans community that got behind her. It is not the brave trans community, not because they're cowards, but because there was no organized trans community. There would have been no trans bars in 1960 for her to sing. So where did she sing? She sang in the gay bars, and she identified as a gay man, as a drag queen. So what happens when you take these wonderful drag queens who performed back then, and who were supported by a wonderful community of gay men, those horrible gay men, who supported the drag queens and loved them, and many still do, and you say that that was a trans person at that time, you are rewriting the history, right? Because the term trans came to being in the 90s. Fantastic. But before that, there was only transsexual, and I think there was transvestite, but there was not the trans community. So I have to say, aren't you going to throw things at me? You have to hear me when I say that we must not rewrite the history. The history is very important, and I point to the Holocaust, okay? So the problem these days for me, as old doddering man, is, we could learn from the history. If we rewrite the history or ignore the history, which is much worse, then we make mistakes, the same mistakes we made before. I see a deadly silence pervading the room. All right, so now I'm going to change things up. I'm going to invite somebody to speak. She's going to read. I don't know exactly what she's going to do. So that's very exciting. Her name is Thérèse Bernier. Am I pronouncing your name right?
That's fine, don't worry about
Thérèse, oh, that means I fucked it up. Will you please give lots of applause for, and I will interview her, and it's because I know about this wonderful project she's doing, and I really want to talk about it with her. Welcome, Thérèse Bernier.
Thank you. All right. Okay, how's this? This good?
That's
Yes.
good. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, this will be interesting. All right. So, Spizzy invited me here tonight. Sky, Gilbert, and I, as well as Kathleen, who's in the audience, we're all working on a project together. And Spizzy will interview me about the project. So I won't talk about it right now, but I'm going to talk about what led up to that project. So I did my PhD at University of Toronto from 2016 to 2022. I was part-time, and the pandemic kind of got in the way. And that's why it took 6 years. I was hoping it would just take 5, but the pandemic slowed me down a bit. So my research was with sex workers. And the name of my dissertation was, I hope I'm not going to bore you with tears, community-based research with Eastern Canadian sex workers on the use of information and communication technology to manage occupational health and safety. So what that means is I was talking to sex workers. I was talking to them about their occupational health and safety risks on the job, and I wanted to find out how they use information communication technology, also known as ICTs, which is the internet, social media, blogging, texting, online communities. I wanted to ask them how they use ICTs to manage their occupational health and safety. I'm an IT nerd, just gotta let you know. I've been in IT since 1983. So in Canada, why is this important? Because in Canada, sex work is informal work. There are no labor protections. And sex workers face many risks on the job, including violent clients refusing to use condoms, or you start out with a condom and then the client stelts the sex worker, which means they remove the condom during the act and they hope the sex worker doesn't notice. Harassment, either on the street or online, and the risk of their occupation being revealed to friends, family, and the general public. This is also known as being outed. The ICTs, so sex workers use ICTs to mitigate those risks, and they provide the sex workers, one of the occupational health and safety strategies that sex workers use is to screen clients. So ICTs help them do that, as well as set the terms of the encounter in advance of meeting the client. And this has led to a decrease in the rate of violence perpetrated against sex workers. Advertising on websites and online marketplaces, when they existed, like Craigslist and Backpage, before the US government instituted FOSTA SESTA, a law that was meant to combat trafficking, but really did not help with that. All it did was put sex workers in danger because they lost all of their ad spaces online, which meant their ability to screen clients before meeting with them decreased. And the great thing about these online ad spaces when they existed was it enabled sex workers to go from working outside, which is quite dangerous, to working inside, which decreased the rate of violence against sex workers. So my research was to understand how Eastern Canadian sex workers use ICTs for their occupational health and safety. The reason it's Eastern Canadian is nobody from the West responded to my call for participants to come and talk to me for my research. So it was sex workers Ontario eastward, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia. So my thesis was a thesis by publication. So I started out my research by looking around the literature. That's what researchers do. We look around the literature to see what's already there, what's already out there, what's already been done. So I wanted to see how sex workers used ICTs. I'm based in Canada. I wanted to know what Canadian sex workers were doing. And if sex workers weren't satisfied with, what was available to them currently online, what would they see as a tool that they could use for occupational health and safety? So after looking around the literature, sex workers of all genders and all venues use ICTs for OHS, occupational health and safety. I only found 3 articles though for Canada, and of those 3, only 2 talked to sex workers about their use of ICTs. And this is one of the big gaps in the research is, I've met a lot of researchers since I started this that talk to sex workers about their work, but that there were only 2 articles in Canada at that time, 2020, that talked to sex workers about how they use ICTs. That's not really asking sex workers what their working lives are like. Okay, so then I did my phase 2 of my research where I actually spoke to sex workers. And this was some of the things they said about using ICTs. They used it to obtain occupational health and safety information. One sex worker said, you really have to use Google, YouTube, get on Twitter, talk to other girls, find out what they're doing to keep themselves safe. So you have to go and find people. You can't just go up to someone and say, hey, are you a sex worker and how do you keep yourself safe? Because no one can admit really to being a sex worker unless they're in a safe space, because although in Canada it's not illegal to say you're a sex worker, it's illegal to make money off of sex work. If you're a sex worker and you want to hire a bodyguard, that bodyguard is doing something illegal by protecting you. Clients can be criminally charged for paying a service provider, which is another term that sex workers use to describe their work. And if you rent space to a sex worker, you can be charged as well with the crime because you're making money off of sex work. And also sex workers, 2 or more sex workers cannot work together. Having 2 sex workers work together, that's also illegal, so they can be charged with the crime. And communicating for the purpose of sex work, such as screening clients, that's also illegal, so they can also be charged with a crime. So you can see why it's a kind of a hidden thing. So sex workers, some of the sex workers I spoke to, they didn't know what they were doing when they started out in sex work. They didn't know what was going to happen in the room with the client. They had to learn how to, on the job, to diffuse a dangerous situation. This is all because they can't talk to people about what they do. So they go online, they find people, they screen the clients thanks to, they place ads. Now they go to Leo List, they place ads, they get a phone call or email from the client and potential client, and sex workers want to have text conversations with the client first so they can get a feel. They know that some people behave in certain patterns, so they're able to determine whether or not it's going to be a safe encounter for them. Sex worker advocacy organizations also have online and also in print format something called a bad date list. And this is a list of clients that have been violent towards sex workers. So sex workers can avail themselves of those bad date lists. But first they have to be vetted by the sex work organization if it's an online bad date list to ensure that they're really a sex worker and not a client posing as a sex worker trying to see if they're on the bad date list. So, but at Maggie's they have the bad date list in print format. Maggie's is now quite close to here. They're in Trinity Square. So you can go there and get a bad date list in print format. Sex workers also, thanks to Twitter, I think a lot, they've been kicked off of Facebook, but Twitter is a place where sex workers can form a group and message each other. They put together, they come up with buddy systems. So this is when a sex worker messages a group of sex workers saying, hey, I'm meeting this client at 7 o'clock. It's supposed to be over by 9. If you haven't heard from me right after 9 o'clock, come and get me and make sure I'm safe, that nothing's happened to me. And although, using ICTs is great for their safety, there are barriers to using ICTs. There's the digital divide. That means not everyone can afford to have a smartphone. One sex worker said, a lot of my friends aren't wealthy enough to have data plans. They'd just be texting and calling. So that means they can't go online and get the bad date list. They just don't have the capability on their phone to do that. And also smartphones, or if it's just a simple cell phone with texting and messaging, it can be used as evidence. As I said, sex work is criminalized in this country. So it can be used, so one sex worker said, the phone can be used as evidence, because if you're text messaging clients, you've got to be mindful of making sure you don't have a call log, you don't have a text message log, because the police, as much as the cell phone has a lot of positives, the police can use it against sex workers to criminalize them. I talked about the ad spaces being shut down. Sex workers have said, they keep shutting down all of our safety sites, all of the sites we used to use to talk to each other and find occupational health and safety information. So Twitter, or now X, does sex workers can go on there, but they also have an algorithm to detect if you're a sex worker. So then they do something called shadow banning. They won't let you, the algorithm won't let you see your sex worker friends anymore. Like they try to hide when your sex worker friends are trying to get in touch with you, or if somebody posts information helpful to sex workers. So then I said, the sex workers, I talked to them, and we also talked about what would be an ideal tool for them for occupational health and safety. So we did something called co-design, and I won't bore you with all the details. Co-design means you talk to the people who are going to use the product, and they design it. I was just like the conduit for their ideas. We want this, we want that. I made up the screens for the website that they would like to have, showed it to them, refined it, and that's co-design. So this is what they wanted. They wanted regional bad date resources. They wanted something called a space on the website called the work of sex work, which would include how to screen clients, how to manage clients, how to do emotional labor, that's de-escalation of dangerous situations. What kind of fetishes are there out there? What kind of massage do people like? Because one of the things I learned when I spoke to sex workers is they're very client service oriented. You hear people talk about customer service. If you want to hire someone who has really good customer service skills, hire a sex worker. Because if a client messages them and says, I'd like to hire you to do XYZ, sexual act. And if the sex worker doesn't know what it is, they will look it up. They will do their research to find out what is that thing that the client wants me to do, because I want them to have a good experience. So I will look it up, and then we'll talk, and I'll say, is this what you meant? And the client says yes, and they get together, and the service occurs. So they wanted a space for that, a space to explain that, like a listing of acronyms. I started seeing this acronym online, FMTY, fly me to you. That means the sex worker is saying to a client in Alberta, I'm in Ontario, but if you like what I can offer you, fly me, pay for my ticket, my travel, fly me to you, FMTY, and we'll do all those things you talked about. We'll do it over a weekend. Some of them also, some sex workers said when they started out, they didn't know what Greek meant. Anybody here know what that means?
Up the ass, maybe.
That's exactly what it means. And some of them thought they only want to do it with Greek people. No, it means up the ass. That's what it means. So the sex workers, they wanted to know what all these terms meant, because this is a website. This would have been an electronic tool, not just for experienced sex workers, but also for sex workers just starting out, so they would get all that information.
So Teresa, I'm enjoying this so
I'm
much.
sorry, I can stop
but
now.
I want to do an interview. I would love it so much if I can get this out of you in the interview.
Okay, so
let's start.
Okay,
Is that okay?
You know what I forgot to do?
I don't mean to interrupt you. What?
I forgot to take my phone with me and set the timer so that I wouldn't talk for so long.
All right.
And that's
we will
that's
go
the
and
thing I
talk.
forgot.
If
So,
that's okay?
Yes.
So bring your
I'm sorry, I
microphone
didn't know
over
how
and
to-
take it. Yay!
I'm sorry if I bored you.
All right, no, I don't think you bore people, but it's time for us to talk back and forth.
Sorry. Hi.
So what the...
Apologize, it was good.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah, no need to apologize. That was very interesting. And the point is, and that's why I have you here, is that no one seems to be talking about this very much. For me, for instance, and we'll just talk about me, because of course I always do. But I didn't know, or I forgot, that this is the present state of the law. That the law is that you can do the sex trade work, but you cannot, what is it? You cannot make money? No. What is
No,
it?
you can't. You can't make money off of it.
Well, the sex trade worker can be paid. But
That is illegal, right, Kathleen?
It's illegal for clients to pay for sex.
right.
But the laws kind of just changed to
So she's saying it's illegal for the clients to pay for the sex.
That's right, yeah. And it's illegal for a third party to advertise for the sex, so like using Craigslist or Backpage.
So I don't understand what's legal about it.
Not much.
It
Not
doesn't
much
sound
is-
like very
not
much is legal.
No,
I mean,
no.
it sounds like you're counting on the niceness of the authorities to not arrest you, but they could arrest you.
They can't arrest you just on the basis that you are a sex worker. I think
Oh,
that's
I
like the
see.
only-
So just because so if you say you're a sex trade worker, they're not going to arrest you. So if a policeman comes up to you on the street or whatever, or emails you whatever and says, "Are you a sex trade worker?" you say yes, they can't arrest you.
Yeah.
But suddenly if they
As
find
long-
out that you're making some money
If-
off
yeah,
it, which
if-
is the whole point of sex trade work. Okay, so so I didn't know that about it. I'll tell you my own personal thing, of course, because you're so interested in my personal life. It's the only time I've ever been involved in sex trade work. You can see, obviously, that I'd be very much in demand. A friend of mine was a male prostitute, and I want to ask you about that, because I'm interested in how many of the male prostitutes there are.
Spizzy, the term is sex work, not
Oh
prostitute.
yes, I'm sorry. Male sex trade worker. So I mean, I had this friend who was a male sex trade worker, and he was doing the phone work. So he was on the phone having the sex on the phone, and he invited me over one day, and I guess he took his, he had a sense of humor. So he said, "Do you want to take a client?" Yeah, so I'm a tourist. I'm not sex trade worker, much as I would wish to be. But I was a tourist. I said, "Okay, we talk or something. I will try it." And I found it very difficult because I like the words. For me, the word. Now, I'm not saying that the sex trade workers on the phone don't like the words. But for me, as a writer, it was like I really want to come up with a great story. Like I want to use lots of words, and I want to create something. And then I thought, "Oh my God, I'm writing." And this is not sex trade work, this is me writing a play or something. Anyway, so I'm interested in, first of all, I didn't really put this down on the thing, but now I've had the Grey Goose, which does seem to work actually. It seems to be worth the money. So, this seems like an obvious question. You tell me, I hope this doesn't offend you, but you are a woman.
Mm-hmm.
A woman who is interested in and does not seem judgmental about the women who do the sex trade work. So how does that work? Because to me, I'm not judgmental about it, and I know that there are women who are not, but there are lots of women who are, who see the sex trade workers as the victim. So why are you not like, it seems to you are not like that. How did you come to that? Is that where you are, or what?
I want to thank you for saying I'm not judgmental. Thank you for that.
Well, I don't think you are.
I grew up in a very, the 60s was an era. I was born in 1958. The 60s, although I did not partake because I was too young, but the 60s were an era of free love. And everybody, and there was no judgment there around that. I grew up in, until I was 13, 14, I lived on military bases, and then I went to live in a civilian area, like a regular town, like you all grew up in, not a military base. But, my family moved to Montreal. I go downtown. There's strip clubs everywhere. Nobody seems offended. I'm like, yeah, okay, this is normal. And actually, 2 blocks from where my parents bought their house, in the town of St. Hubert, there was a strip club in Quebec. It's called a Club à Gogo, a go-go club. Okay, cool. And then not too long after that, a sex shop opened a block from my parents' house. So in Quebec, that's kind of a normal neighborhood. When I moved to Toronto, it took me a long time to tell anybody about that, because that was 1983, and apologies to all the Torontonians, but this was kind of a repressed place back
It's
then.
very repressed place.
Yeah.
Even now, it's very repressed, Ontario.
And when I met my husband Glenn, we met in Montreal, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I used to go to a strip club with my friends when I was doing my MBA." I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's cool," because Glenn was in his program with a couple of people from Singapore, a couple of male students from Singapore, where a strip club's not allowed. And they thought Montreal was just the greatest thing. And they go to the strip clubs, and they had money, and they're paying the strippers, not necessarily for lap dances, but, just giving them money while they're on stage, right? I'm like, yeah, that's cool that you did that. I've been to a strip club myself. In Montreal, there was one for women. It was
I
kind of.
went to the women's night at the gay strip club. I don't know if that's what you went to.
It was
but-
Club something or other on St. Catherine East.
Oh, that was probably gay. On the gay nights that I went to, it's very interesting because they have the women in the gay strip club. They had the whole night. Now they just have the women's there with the men's, which is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But they had the separate nights with the women, and it was so scary for me. And I think it was scary for some of the strippers because it's very funny. The men's, when they are around the strippers, and I think this applies to the male strippers and the female, they tend to be very quiet. The men, when they're watching the strippers, right? The women, oh my God. And this is maybe, explains the reasons. Maybe someone has tried to explain to me the reasons. But the women go crazy. And they would go on stage, and they would climb on top of the men.
Oh, no.
Climb on top of the strippers. This not happen when you went?
No, I wasn't allowed at that place. No, you couldn't touch anybody. No, you're just sit there.
Well, that's probably because it was a gay place that I went
clap, cheer, have fun, and waiting in line to get in was part of the experience. The guys would drive by in their cars in French. Hey, why are you going in there? I got what you need.
But it sounds to me as if you must be a sex-positive person. I put this in my questions for you,
yes.
So it's not a too personal question to
ask.
No,
that's fine. No, yes, I am sex-positive
person.
Yeah,
and what does sex-positive mean to you?
To me, it means people's sex lives are their own business.
Exactly.
As long as it's consensual.
Absolutely.
But, people do what they want to do together. It's not, like I said, it's none of my business.
Exactly.
And I'm happy if someone's had a good, I don't need to hear about it, but I'm happy if someone's had a good sexual experience because it is part of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So
and
to me that's being sex positive.
Absolutely. Now, did you find when you were doing your research, did you find that you had men's sex trade workers ever?
Yes, I did.
What proportion would you say?
Not a lot, because the men don't really want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was fortunate that Mandy Goodhandy and her partner at the time, Todd Klink, her business partner, and because it was a pandemic, it was hard to track people down, hard to find people to talk to because Maggie's had shut down. Maggie's had a drop in 4 male sex workers, but because of the pandemic, they had shut all their drop-ins.
Mm-hmm.
But Mandy knew the research I was doing because she'd help me out with some of it, and I spoke to Todd, and Todd is a very
openly gay sex, or at least he has
former sex worker. Yeah.
Former sex.
So he asked some of the people he knew if they would be willing to talk to me, and he put me in touch with 4 men, and I was fortunate to find 4 men to talk to.
Well, I do find that very interesting. But about the way the men deal with it, which is different the way the men. I mean, there's obviously stigma for all of them, and there's obviously still a stigma. So this is bringing us to the project that Sky Gilbert, who's this other person I know, and is going to be working on with you. So explain a little bit about that. It is a project in exploring stigma through a sex trade worker musical, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it is. So while I was writing up the discussion portion of my dissertation, one thing that came up over and over again was the stigma directed at sex workers. Now, I brought a bit of history, but that's okay. So it used to be in Europe, in the mid-14th century, and also the late 14th and 15th centuries, civic governments legalized and municipalized sex work, which meant there were municipally run brothels at the time, also private ones, in Toulouse and in Florence and other European cities. Sex workers were restricted to certain parts of the cities and also certain times of day, but it was not illegal to be a sex worker. But then starting in the 16th century, sex work was stigmatized due to religious reforms and a movement to restrict what was acceptable behavior sexually and for gender. So gender became very restricted. France, Germany, and England closed their brothels, and sex work became a punishable offense.
May I just interrupt you slightly? Because I've been doing a little bit of research about the Florence and the gay men. And it's interesting that Florence at that time was also very open. They had a very active gay and what they did was the police were tolerating to some degrees the gay activity. It was like, this is human. Like, these are human beings and they are enjoying this. The other thing I will say, which is very interesting, sorry, because I've been reading about their stuff, is that in this period, Christianity apparently, we think of the Middle Ages as Christian. It was actually pagan. It was the Christian talk, lots of Christian talk. But wasn't until the very time you're talking now about when they closed the brothels. That was the time when they went. That was the time when Christianity took over. When Europe actually became Christian. So no surprise. Keep going.
And I wanted to say now in the 21st century here in Canada, we were just talking about how sex work is illegal. Money can't change hands. I was also going to mention some examples of stigma. Recently in Newmarket in 2022, there was a crackdown on Asian massage parlors. They wanted to run them out of town. July 2018, there was a poll in Ontario. 77% of Ontarians said no woman would ever want to do sex work, but they didn't talk about men. They're just about women. The other issue is that trafficking and sex work are conflated. They're two totally different things.
That is underlines that. Go ahead.
And sex workers have said, we can help you identify who's being trafficked, but they will not take the sex workers' help for that.
That's fascinating.
Healthcare also stigmatizes sex workers, but I have to say that during the pandemic, Maggie's Toronto and Toronto Public Health got together. They went down to, I forgot the name of the strip club in the Sherbourne East. What's it called? Fillmore's.
Fillmore's. It's still there, I think.
Yeah, they did a vaccination clinic there at Fillmore's for sex workers and homeless people. So they did that. So that was good. But because it's criminalization leads to stigmatization.
Absolutely.
In Hamilton, there's a sex worker action project. Hamilton, Yelena Vermillion is the executive director. She's working with Sky and Kathleen and I on this musical project.
Yes, and I just want to interrupt you and say, for me, what this is about, and see if you think I'm right, is that if you don't like the sex trade work, where you stigmatize it, there is this whole thing of conflating, absolutely conflating the trafficking with sex trade work. But the other thing is, this is a principle I believe. You can have the sex and you can have the love, not necessarily at the same time. And this is human. Not for everyone, not all the time, but it is human. And that sometimes sex and love, like sex doesn't always come with. So I believe that's one reason I'm involved in this project. I believe that
Sky's involved.
Sky, sorry, I'm not involved. I'm not involved at all. It's nothing to do with me. But Sky's involved. In terms of this project, I believe that every sexual act that is consensual is an act of love. Do you understand what I mean? If two people agree to have sex together, it is an act of love. But do you know what I mean about the separation? Like people feel, I'm just going out to have sex, that's bad. You shouldn't just want to have sex, right? And don't you think that's a bit weird that they can't understand that human beings do that sometimes?
Well, I wouldn't say the sex workers love their clients in that way.
But I think it's an act of love what they do. Do you understand what I mean? Because if they've consented to it, no, you don't understand what I mean. It's a loving act for them to participate in that. And no, what?
Kathleen, what do you think
I don't
about?
know.
Well, I want to definitely say that there's some clients who really love their sex workers.
Right. So she said there's some clients who really love their sex workers.
And just because they're paying them doesn't take away that love for them.
The what?
Just because they're paying them doesn't take away that love.
And just because they're paying. So in other words, there is love within that relationship.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I understand that.
I think for some, not for everyone.
So not always. But just tell me finally, we'll have to find out. But tell me what this project we're going to, no, I'm not doing it, but Sky and doing all the other people, what are they going to do in this sex trade worker project?
Okay, so the stigma, that's how we got started on this. Okay, so the stigma came up over and over again. And I thought, what could we do to reduce the stigma? Because, when you get a PhD, it's not just, woo, I got my PhD. You have to do something with it.
Absolutely.
You can't just, sit there and put it on your resume. Yeah. you got that education so that you could use it for something. So I thought, what could we do to reduce the stigma? And I thought, what if it was a musical about sex work, written with sex workers, all the lyrics approved by sex workers, if they want to be the performers in the musical. And it's not a happy thing. It's just sex workers telling their stories. You know, it's not a flashy thing.
They could be good stories. They could be bad stories.
Yeah.
They could be fun stories.
Exactly. Yeah. So, so I got a grant, government grant to do this, and so we're going to interview the sex workers. Then we're going to take what they've said in the interviews. We're going to turn that into lyrics, and then we're going to perform it in front of audiences. And then,
hope you will come.
And then we're going to have a focus group after each night, a focus group of 6 to 8 audience members. We'll have a focus group to discuss what they saw, what they heard, what did they know about sex work beforehand, what did they think about it, and what do they think about it now.
And I'm afraid we will have to wrap up, but I am hoping that you will all come and see our show. And what's it called now? Don't we have a title?
Oh, yes. So Mandy named it.
Yes, Mandy. Good, Handy.
Sex Worker Diaries, Spoken and Sung.
Thank you. Please come to see that. And thank you, Thérèse Bernier. Good night, everyone. We'll see you next Spizzy.